A female captain gets publicly shamed at dawn, forced into impossible combat drills, and set up to fail over and over again. But every humiliation is part of a bigger trap, because beneath the torn uniform, the hidden tattoo, and the fake personnel file is a dead operator, returned from the grave to hunt the colonel who sold out her team.
Have you ever been publicly humiliated for something so minor it was laughable? That was exactly how Colonel Victor Hale liked to start his mornings. His voice cracked through the frosty air, sharp and mean. Captain Anders, if you can't even manage your own uniform, how can you possibly manage a command? In an instant, 60 soldiers stopped dead in their tracks, their breaths turning to smoke as they all swiveled to stare. And right in the middle of that circle of judgment was Captain Leah Anders. She was a small woman, barely 5'4", with her dark hair pulled back so severely it had to hurt, and her eyes held the promise of a brewing thunderstorm. But she never broke. Her breathing stayed slow and deliberate. And if you think this is just another story about a bully, you need to stick around, because you have no idea what's coming next. The colonel hopped down from his stand, his polished boots clicking on the pavement as he prowled around her. "Does everyone see this?" he roared, jabbing a finger toward a nearly invisible grease smudge on the collar of her gray shirt. "This is the rot that sets in when we lower our standards, when we allow time's distractions, times into our ranks." He said that with pure venom, and the entire formation knew he was talking about her being a woman. A couple of men in the back snorted with laughter. Lia's expression remained a perfect mask of indifference, but her knuckles were bone white. Hale leaned in until she could smell the stale coffee on his breath. "I should have you transferred back to whatever desk you crawled out from under. But first," the colonel announced, "Corporal Briggs, front and center." A mountain of a man named Jake Briggs swaggered out of the formation. He was 240 pounds of pure muscle and arrogance, and he'd been smirking the entire time. "Sir," he barked with theatrical enthusiasm. The colonel gestured lazily toward Leah. "The captain's shirt. I need you to, inspect times it for regulation, compliance." The order was so bizarre, so completely out of line, that an uneasy hush fell over the men. Even Briggs seemed to pause for a heartbeat before positioning himself behind Leia. She didn't flinch, didn't even tense her shoulders, just maintained that steady, calm breathing. Briggs hooked his fingers into the collar of her shirt. "Begging your pardon, ma'am," he grunted, his voice thick with mock sincerity. Then he ripped it. The sound of tearing fabric was like a pistol shot in the cold, quiet air. The shirt split wide open, all the way down her spine. A collective gasp went through the crowd as the icy air hit her exposed back. But it wasn't the shame of it that left them speechless. It was what they saw. Covering her entire back was a breathtakingly detailed tattoo of a giant hawk, wings unfurled from shoulder to shoulder, its talons ready to strike. The detail was so fine you could see each individual feather. Tiny lines of text were inked across the bird's chest and woven into its wings, too small to make out, but the sheer artistry of it was stunning. This was no drunken mistake from a back alley shop. It was a masterpiece, etched in skin. And it was clearly something more. Way in the back, a grizzled old sergeant's eyes widened in dawning comprehension. But then the snickering started again. "Whoa, get a load of the angry chicken," one guy muttered. "Think she won that in a game of skee-ball?" Another joked. And the laughter spread like a virus. Colonel Hale just stood there with his arms crossed, a smug, satisfied grin on his face. "Well, well, Captain, that's quite a fashion statement," he said, his voice dripping with condescending amusement. "Let me guess, that piece of art cost you a whole month's salary?" The laughter grew louder, and Leia just stood there, unmoving, as the tatters of her shirt fluttered in the morning breeze. As the sun finally crested the horizon, its first rays lit up the ink, making the hawk seem to leap off her skin. Hale squinted, trying to read the words on its chest. "What's that supposed to be? Some kind of cheesy motivational phrase like carpe diem?" He taunted, and the men howled. Briggs, still holding a scrap of her shirt, added, "Looks like something you'd get after watching a Rambo marathon, sir." Hale nodded sagely. "Ah, yes, the I Want to Be a Hero special. I bet she's got a monster truck and a pet eagle, too." He turned back to the formation. "Let this be a warning to all of you. You can decorate yourselves with all the ink you want, but it will never replace genuine skill and hard-won experience. He shot Leia one last dismissive look. Find a new shirt, Captain, and for God's sake, cover that thing up. This is the Army, not a boardwalk sideshow. With a flick of his wrist, he dismissed the formation. Leia finally released a long, slow breath. She turned and walked toward the barracks, her spine straight and her head high, never saying a word. The whispers erupted behind her. The nerve of some people, probably got it on vacation in Florida. Looks like she ran out of money before they could finish it. But at the very back of the crowd, Sergeant Major Thomas Hayes wasn't laughing one bit. Hayes was 58 years old, with 32 of those spent in uniform. He'd seen pretty much everything, and he was seeing something now that these young recruits were completely blind to. That specific style of tattoo, you couldn't get that on a whim. That was the kind of ink a soldier earned in a place where there were no tattoo parlors, the kind that told a story without words. As Leia disappeared from view, he glanced at the man next to him, Commander Adam Reed, a Navy SEAL on temporary assignment. Reed was staring intently at the empty space where Leia had stood. Something catch your eye, Commander? Hayes murmured. Reed shook his head slowly. Her stillness, he answered. When that ape put his hands on her, she didn't have a single tell. She just stood there like she was expecting it. Hayes grunted. Expecting what? Reed's expression was grim. Discomfort. Pain. She has absolute control. The only people I've ever seen with that kind of discipline have been through SARE. SARE, survival, evasion, resistance, and escape. It's an infamous, brutal training program reserved for the most elite special operations forces in the world. Hayes' eyebrows shot up. You think she's more than just a logistics officer? Reed didn't answer. A moment later, in a cold, echoing bathroom, Leia stared at her own reflection in a clouded mirror. Her shirt was ruined, but under the humming fluorescent lights, the hawk on her back seemed to pulse with a life of its own. She fished a small, battered coin out of her pocket. The metal was worn smooth from years of being held. On one side was an etching of a bird, on the other, a string of numbers. She ran her thumb over its familiar surface before placing it carefully on the sink counter. Her face in the mirror was a blank canvas, not a trace of anger or humiliation, just the same metronome steady breathing. Then, for the first time that morning, a tiny smile touched the corner of her mouth. It wasn't a smile of happiness. It was the smile of a grandmaster who had just watched her opponent blunder into a trap she had set a dozen moves ago. She pulled on a fresh shirt, slipped the coin back into her pocket, and walked back out to face the day. The rest of the day was an exercise in petty cruelty. In the dining hall, someone loudly asked if she was going to fly away when winter came. An instructor asked if she had any other tribal art she wanted to share with the class. Leia let it all slide off her like rain. She completed her work, she organized her reports, she managed the supply chains, all the tedious, invisible tasks that keep a military base running. By lunchtime, her name had become a joke. To pull and Anders meant you were all flash and no fire. Some joker in IT even started a private chat group, naming it The Eagle Has Landed, with a cartoon hawk icon. Within an hour, over 20 people had joined the chat. Leia didn't know about the messages, but she noticed everything else. She was watching. She cataloged every person who laughed too loud, every person who looked away in shame, and the very small number of people who suddenly looked at her with a newfound sense of fear. Meanwhile, in his office, Colonel Hale flipped through her official file. Captain Leia Anders, 29 years old, intelligence analyst, a few unremarkable postings, now assigned here as a liaison. Her record was clean but boring, no combat deployments, no special assignments, nothing. He slammed the folder shut, feeling smugly correct. Just another paper pusher with an ego, he grumbled to himself. He'd seen her type before, 100 times over. That tattoo was probably the only interesting thing she'd ever done. But Hale had other, more pressing concerns. Leia was a wild card in the tightly controlled world he had built, and he couldn't have that. Not with a major base inspection coming up, and definitely not with a few questionable financial records. He needed to remain deeply buried. He had to crush her, make her an example for everyone else. He decided it was time to remind everyone what a real warrior looked like. He made one phone call, The next morning, Hale called another special formation. Captain Anders, I have a new assignment for you. Effective immediately, you will be joining Bravo team for their live fire, close quarters combat drill. A stunned silence descended on the field. Since you're so concerned with your image, he added with a nasty smile, here's your opportunity to prove you're more than just a pretty picture. Your tactical gear is waiting. Report to the training range at 0800. This wasn't an analyst's drill. This was a high-speed, lethal force scenario designed for the most seasoned operators on the entire base. He had just tossed her to the wolves. This wasn't a training exercise. It was a setup, plain and simple, designed to humiliate a logistics officer in front of an entire combat team. And Captain Laia Anders knew it. Still, she just gave a single, sharp nod. Yes, sir. When she got to the range, the gear they'd laid out for her was practically a joke. The rifle looked like a museum piece. Its stock was a roadmap of scratches, and the iron sights were so visibly bent it was comical. The tactical vest they handed her was 2 sizes too big, hanging off her frame like a sack, and her earpiece was already crackling with static. The real members of Bravo team were gearing up nearby, watching her with a mix of pity and morbid fascination. Finally, one of them, Corporal Miles Chen, strolled over. No offense, ma'am, but have you ever actually done this before? Laia just yanked the straps on the ridiculously oversized vest as tight as they'd go. I'll be fine. Chen shot a smirk back at his buddies. All right, Captain, listen up. It's a simple drill. Clear 3 rooms. You've got good guys and bad guys mixed together. We go in, drop the threats, and make sure not to hit our friendlies. Your job is rear security. Basically, stay out of our way and try not to shoot us. The team leader, a grizzled staff sergeant named Travis Cole, chimed in, his tone a little softer but just as dismissive. Seriously, Captain, there's no shame in sitting this one out if it's not your speed. We move pretty fast. Laia met his gaze, her face a perfect mask of calm. I think I can manage, she repeated. Cole heaved a loud, theatrical sigh. Okay then, your funeral. The starting buzzer blared. As the team formed up on the door, Laia fell into position at the very back, her beat-up rifle held perfectly at the low ready. The breaching charge blew the door off its hinges, and the team flooded the room like a tidal wave of controlled chaos and shouted commands. Laia was a shadow right behind them. They ripped through the first room in a matter of seconds. 2 hostiles down, 0 friendlies hit. But as they stormed into the second room, their confidence made them sloppy. They were moving too fast, getting cocky, and they completely missed a deep, shadowy corner. A hostile target suddenly appeared. Chen swung his rifle around, but a friendly target stood directly in his line of fire. He had no shot. Chen, you're blocked! Move! Cole yelled, but the drill clock on the wall was ticking down. If a threat wasn't neutralized in under 3 seconds, the entire team would fail. Cole was already starting to curse when Laia made her move. She didn't push forward, she shifted sideways. 2 quick, silent steps to her right created a brand new, perfectly clear line of sight to the target. In one smooth, unbroken motion, her rifle rose, and she fired a single, precise shot. The hostile target snapped back. A hole punched through its dead center. Chen just stared, his mouth hanging open. How did you? But Laia was already gliding toward the third and final room. Cole blinked, shaking his head as if to clear the fog, and barked at his team to get moving. The last room was a total nightmare, 4 hostiles and 2 friendlies packed into a space the size of a walk-in closet. The team got tangled up, bumping into each other while trying to find a clean shot. Someone had to take a risky angle. Without a second's hesitation, Laia dropped to one knee, creating a lower shooting platform, and fired 2 quick, clean shots. 2 more hostiles dropped. The friendlies were completely unharmed. The drill was over. The range is clear, a voice boomed over the intercom. Final time, 47 seconds. That's a new facility record. The room fell dead silent. The officer then added, and just for the record, the old record was 52 seconds, set by an instructor from SEAL Team 6. The men stood there, completely stunned. Chen looked from his custom, high-end rifle to Laia. What in the world just happened? Cole's expression had morphed from irritation to pure shock. "Captain, where in the hell did you learn to shoot like that?" Laya calmly dropped the magazine and cleared her weapon. "Practice," she said, her voice completely emotionless. She set the rifle on the table and walked out, leaving the entire team staring after her in stunned silence. Cole whipped out his phone and started typing furiously. High above in the observation booth, a man named Hayes was glued to a monitor. "Run that again," he commanded. The technician replayed the footage in slow motion. Hayes wasn't watching the targets, he was watching Laya's footwork. The way she systematically cleared every corner, her perfect weapon handling, her flawless trigger discipline, every single movement was brutally efficient. The kind of skill that is forged in the fire of countless real-world gunfights. This wasn't just practice, this was instinct. Muscle memory burned so deep it was second nature. He zoomed in on her grip, her thumbs forward, elbows tucked in tight. It was the signature form of a Tier 1 special operator. Hayes leaned back. "Commander Reed," he said into his comms, "I think you're going to want to come down here and see this for yourself." Reed arrived 10 minutes later. Hayes simply played the video. Reed watched, his face unreadable. When it finished, he pointed at the screen. "Go back to the second room. That shot she took from the side, freeze it." Reed stared at the frozen image, breaking down her stance, her posture, the way she tilted her head. "That's a JSOC technique," he said, his voice quiet. He meant the Joint Special Operations Command, the absolute pinnacle of the military, home to units like Delta Force and SEAL Team 6. The way she's using the door frame to stabilize her shot, they only teach that in the Advanced Hostage Rescue course. "The one for operators who do this for a living?" Hayes nodded in agreement. "And her shot grouping in the last room?" I checked the report. Both shots landed inside a 2-inch circle, from 15 feet away, while kneeling, with a rifle that had messed up sights. Reed rubbed his chin, processing. She compensated for the bad sights without a single test shot. That means she knew the weapon was off the second she picked it up, which means she knows her weapons, Hayes concluded. Like, Asterisk really times knows them. They both looked at Laya's image on the screen, her face a mask of pure, cold focus. There was no adrenaline dump, no excitement, just a professional executing a task she had clearly performed thousands of times. Reed pulled out his phone and scrolled through her official service record once more. It says right here she's an intelligence analyst. No advanced weapons training, no combat deployments, nothing. A big fat 0. So where did she learn all that? Hayes wondered aloud. Reed had no idea. Down on the now silent range, Laya was alone. She had stayed behind to collect her brass casings, a deep-seated habit from a life she had left behind. She carefully gathered 3 of the spent shells and arranged them on the concrete in a small triangle. She gazed at the simple pattern for a long moment before kicking the shells apart with the toe of her boot. Some habits were just too dangerous to keep. As she turned to leave, she nearly walked into Sergeant Carter, the range officer, who was nervously fidgeting with a clipboard. "Captain Anders, that was really something." Laya just offered him a quick, polite nod. "Thank you." Carter cleared his throat, searching for the right words. "Look, I've run this range for 8 years. I've had Green Berets, Rangers, SEALs, even a couple of Delta operators come through here. And you, ma'am, you just shattered every single one of their records." Laya's expression didn't flicker. Conditions were ideal. There wasn't any wind today. Carter could only stare back, baffled. "Wind? Ma'am, we're indoors." "Exactly," Laya replied, and walked right past him, leaving him frozen in place. He looked down at the target report in his hand. Every one of her shots had landed in the thoracic triangle, the kill zone. Not one miss, not one wasted movement. He had seen thousands of shooters over his career, but only a few ever displayed that kind of surgical precision. And all of them had one thing in common: they had seen real combat. He keyed his radio, range control, to Commander Reed. "I need to speak with him immediately. It's urgent." If you have ever been underestimated, you know that incredible feeling of proving someone wrong in the most spectacular way possible. Go ahead and hit that like button if you agree that actions always speak louder than words. And if you want to see how this quiet storm is about to turn their whole world upside down, make sure you subscribe, because her story is just getting started. By dinner that evening, the tale of Laya's mind-blowing performance had spread across the base like wildfire. But it didn't earn her any respect. It just made people suspicious. Over in the dining hall, a soldier named Foster was loudly broadcasting his theory to anyone within earshot. So what? She had a lucky run. Big deal. She probably practiced that one drill for weeks. Someone at his table shot back, but how could she know which drill they were going to run? Foster waved the question away like it was a pesky fly. She's a liaison officer, right? She probably just got her hands on the training schedule. It's completely obvious. A few other guys nodded in agreement. It was the simple explanation, the one that let them save face. A nerdy paper pusher had cheated to make them look bad. That was a much easier pill to swallow than the truth. At another table, a soldier named Briggs ate his meal in silence, completely lost in thought. It all started when he tore her shirt. He'd cornered her, trying to intimidate her after she shattered a training record held by the Navy SEALs by 47 seconds. But when he grabbed her, she just stood there, completely unfazed. No fear, no anger. It was like he wasn't even there. It was that chilling calm that really got under his skin. Who was this woman? If you want to uncover the shocking truth behind the soldier they called a ghost, you've got to hear this. He lost his appetite and shoved his dinner tray away. Across the mess hall, Laya sat alone, ignoring the whispers and the stares. She just ate her meal with a quiet, efficient rhythm. Chicken, rice, and vegetables. 4 bites, a sip of water, 4 more bites. It was robotic, disciplined. From the serving line, another soldier named Hayes watched her, a knot forming in his stomach. He'd seen that look before, that precise, almost desperate way of eating. He'd seen it in prisoners of war, people starved to the edge, who treated every calorie like gold because they never knew where their next meal was coming from. That night, Commander Reed was wide awake in his quarters, staring at the ceiling. He couldn't shake the image of Laya from the training video. The way she moved, so fluid and economical, it triggered a ghost of a memory from a mission almost 20 years ago. He was just 19 back then, a brand new SEAL escorting a convoy in Syria. The job was simple: protect a high-value analyst moving between safe houses. The analyst was a small, quiet woman Reed had barely even noticed. And then the world exploded. A roadside bomb turned the truck in front of them into a fireball. The blast flipped Reed's Humvee through the air like a toy, the world becoming a sickening blur of sky and ground. When it finally stopped, he was trapped in a heap of twisted metal. His vision was tunneling, and he could feel the warm, sticky pool of his own blood growing around him. That's when he felt them small, steady hands pulling at him. A voice, impossibly calm in the middle of all that chaos, said, "Stay with me. Breathe in for 4 seconds, out for 4 seconds." It was the analyst. She had somehow pulled him from the wreck, dragged him to cover, and was applying perfect pressure to his wounds. She called in the rescue chopper herself and stayed by his side until he blacked out. He woke up in a field hospital, but she was gone. The official report was a dead end, a civilian contractor whose file was completely classified. For years, he searched for the angel who saved his life just to say thank you. And now, sitting bolt upright in his bunk, his heart hammered against his ribs, in for 4, out for 4, Reed remembered her whisper. That breathing technique wasn't just a trick to calm someone down. It was a key. He flipped open his laptop and dove into the classified military archives. He ran a search for every civilian contractor who served in Syria between 2017 and 2019. He started adding filters: medical background, intelligence field, female, between 25 and 30 years old. 43 names appeared. He added more keywords: certifications in combat first aid, human intelligence training, fluency in local dialects. The list shrank. 20 names, then 10, then 5. Finally, a single file loaded on his screen. The name next to the photograph made his blood run cold: Captain Leah Anders. Assignment: Ghost Hawk Intelligence Cell. Status: Killed in action, 2019. Record permanently sealed. Reed stared, his mind reeling. K-I-A. But she was right here, on his base, alive and breathing. This meant one of two things. The entire military database was wrong, or someone had gone to extraordinary lengths to fake her death, to make her a ghost. The next morning, during another simulation, a new private named Lee, trying to show off, misjudged a handhold on an obstacle wall. He fell 12 feet and landed with a sound that made everyone's stomach turn. A raw scream cut through the air. His left leg was bent at a sickening, unnatural angle. A shard of white bone had punched right through his fatigues, and blood was already soaking the gravel beneath him. For a split second, everyone just froze. Then someone yelled, "Medic!" But the medic was 300 yards away, on the other side of the course. It would take him 5 minutes to get there. Lee just kept screaming while his squad mates stood around him, completely useless, panic spreading like a virus. Then, like she had teleported, Laya was there. She knelt beside him, her voice cutting through his pained cries. "Lee, look at me!" His terrified eyes locked onto hers. "Breathe with me," she said, her voice impossibly firm but gentle. "In for 4, she demonstrated, taking a slow, deep breath. Lee choked back a sob and tried to copy her. Out for 4. Slowly, his panicked breathing began to stabilize, but Laya was already moving. From a cargo pocket, she pulled out a small kit containing combat gauze, a splint, and nitrile gloves. That wasn't standard issue for a liaison officer. Where did she get that? She snapped the gloves on with a practiced flick of her wrist. "This is going to hurt like hell," she told him calmly. "But if I don't set this bone now, you could lose your leg. Do you understand?" Lee, with tears streaking through the dirt on his face, managed a small nod. Laya moved with a mesmerizing speed and precision. She packed the wound with gauze, applying steady, direct pressure to stop the bleeding. Her hands were solid, confident, no hesitation at all. And she kept talking, her voice cool and clinical. "The body can lose about 15% of its blood before shock sets in. You're at about 8%. You're doing great. You're going to be fine." Lee clung to her words. She expertly splinted his leg, immobilizing the fracture. Then she pulled out a radio. It wasn't a standard training model. It was smaller, more advanced. She keyed the mic. "This is NATO training actual," she said, her voice crisp and authoritative. "I need an immediate medevac. I have 1 casualty. Compound fracture of the left tibia and fibula. Bleeding is controlled. Patient is stable but requires surgery within 30 minutes. She then rattled off a perfect 9-line report, the kind medics call in under enemy fire. It was flawless. Line 1, grid coordinates. Line 2, radio frequency. Line 3, number of patients. Line 4, special equipment needed. All the way down to line 9, patient's nationality. The soldiers around her were speechless. You don't learn that in a classroom. You learn that by calling in real helicopters while bullets are snapping over your head, where one mistake gets people killed. The helicopter was on the ground in just 7 minutes. The medics rushed out, took one look at Lee, and got him on a stretcher. The lead paramedic paused. "Who stabilized him?" he asked. Someone pointed at Leia. The paramedic inspected her work, the expertly packed wound, the perfectly secured splint. "This is textbook," he said, shaking his head. "No, this is better than textbook. You just saved this kid's leg." Laya stood and peeled off her bloody gloves. "He did the hard part," she said quietly. He stayed calm. But the paramedic knew better. "Ma'am, with all due respect, I've been doing this for 15 years. What you just did, that's Tactical Combat Casualty Care. TCCC. That's Special Forces level. Where did you get that training?" Laya just turned and walked away, leaving a crowd of stunned soldiers in her wake. Hayes finally pushed through the group, his mind blown. He saw it all in a glance. The dark smear of blood on the gravel next to the torn open medical wrappers. His focus sharpened. TCCC gear wasn't standard issue for a desk jockey. That was for the pros, the medics, the rangers, the special forces guys who operate where backup isn't an option. He crouched and snagged a discarded glove wrapper. It was military, sure, but the lot number was ancient, stamped before 2020. That told him she'd been carrying this stuff in a personal kit for years. A woman who was always prepared for the absolute worst. Hayes carefully tucked the wrapper into his pocket. On the other side of the base, Lee was being prepped for surgery. They'd already contacted his mom, assuring her that the doctors expected him to make a complete recovery. The lead surgeon was flipping through the intake report when he paused, a deep crease forming on his forehead. "Who stabilized this soldier in the field?" he demanded, of a nearby nurse. "This is textbook, graduate-level trauma work." The nurse scanned the chart. "A Captain Anders, sir. She's listed as a liaison officer." The surgeon reread the notes, then grabbed his phone and dialed the base commander. "Sir," he said, his voice low, "I think we either have a serious problem or we have a secret weapon, and I'm not sure which one it is." By afternoon, Laya was standing in Major Owen Cross's office. Cross was a man built from regulations and paperwork, a thin, balding officer who seemed allergic to people. He didn't even raise his eyes from his desk as she entered. "Captain Anders, I've been instructed to go over your medical training history." Leia stood motionless, a statue in fatigues. "Sir," Cross slid a paper-thin folder across the desk. "According to your official service file, you attended a basic first aid workshop 6 years ago. That's it. There's nothing else. And definitely nothing that would authorize you to perform a complex emergency procedure on a fellow soldier." He finally looked up, his eyes locking onto hers. "And yet, today, you ran a flawless 9-line medevac and delivered a level of care that the head surgeon believes saved Private Lee's leg and quite possibly his life." Laya said nothing. Cross leaned back, his chair groaning in protest. "So, we have two possibilities. Either our official records are a complete joke, or you're hiding an extraordinary skill set. Which is it, Captain?" "I learned through experience, sir." "What experience?" "Previous posts." Cross's eyes narrowed into tiny, suspicious slits. "Your file shows assignments at Fort Bragg and Ramstein Air Base. Both were administrative roles. You have no recorded field experience. 0 deployments." Cross pressed, his tone heavy with disbelief. "So let me ask you one more time. Where did you acquire this experience?" Laya met his stare without flinching. "Sir, sometimes the most valuable lessons aren't the ones that make it into the official record." Cross glared at her for a few tense seconds before snapping her file shut with a crack. "For your own good, Captain, I'm going to pretend this conversation never took place. But you should know whispers have already started, and when people start digging, they tend to find things, whether you like it or not." Leia offered a curt nod. "Understood, sir." She pivoted and walked out. The moment the door clicked shut, Cross was back on the phone. "Colonel Hale, we have a situation. It concerns Captain Anders." That evening, pictures began circulating in a private chat group, showing Laya working furiously to save Private Lee. "Have you ever been completely screwed over? I mean, set up to fail so badly that it threatened to destroy everything you've worked for? If you have, you need to hear this. Because what happened to me was a textbook case of betrayal. And if you're someone who roots for the underdog, go ahead and hit that like and subscribe button right now." It all kicked off with a scholarship, the Beaumont Scholarship for Art. It wasn't just tuition money. It was my lifeline. The one thing I was fighting for to honor my mom. She was my rock, my only family. And after I lost her, winning it felt like the only way to prove her faith in me wasn't wasted. I was juggling 2 jobs, running on fumes, and pouring every ounce of my being into my portfolio. It was my story, drawn in charcoal and ink. Then, I got called into the dean's office. He had my portfolio laid out, and for a heart-stopping second, I thought my dream was coming true. I couldn't have been more wrong. He showed me an email. An anonymous source had accused me of plagiarism, claiming my entire body of work, the art inspired by my own mother, was stolen. Just like that, I was disqualified. The scholarship was gone. And the new winner? Madison Clare, a girl whose father practically ran the town and who, I was pretty sure, thought a paintbrush was for touching up her manicure. It was a kick in the teeth. I was shattered. But underneath the grief, a little ember of rage started to glow. I knew I hadn't stolen anything, and I had a pretty good idea who had. That's when I remembered Madison bragging about her dad's new smart home, a fortress of technology. And a wild plan began to take shape. Surprise number one, Mr. Claire was so arrogant about his new mansion that he'd let an architecture magazine do a huge spread on it, even naming the security firm he used. Surprise number two, a little digging revealed that the security company had some pretty terrible online reviews about its digital defenses. It was a crazy long shot, but it was all I had. For 3 straight days, I mainlined coffee and devoured everything I could learn from coding forums. I wasn't a hacker, I was just a desperate artist with a search engine and a score to settle. And then, it happened. 2 words lit up my screen. Access granted. I was inside. I began sifting through security footage, not even sure what I was hoping to find. Kitchen, garden, home theater. Then I saw it. Study. I clicked the file, and my world tilted. The big reveal wasn't just proof of my innocence. It was a video of Madison's father on a video call, hiring a sketchy digital artist to build a portfolio from the ground up. I don't care about the price, he was saying. My daughter needs the prestige that comes with this scholarship. They hadn't just taken my dream, they'd fabricated a new one and used it to bury me. The award ceremony was the next day. As Dean Thompson proudly called a smirking Madison to the stage, the massive screen behind him flickered to life. It wasn't a picture of Madison, it was the feed from her father's study. The entire auditorium fell silent. You could see the color drain from Madison's face and the pure fury rising in her father's. My revenge wasn't just clearing my name, it was broadcasting the unvarnished truth for everyone to see. In the aftermath, the Clare family became a local joke. The university didn't just give me the Beaumont scholarship, they offered me a full ride through graduation. It was more than I had ever dared to dream of. So what's the lesson? Never let anyone make you feel small or powerless, because your integrity, your truth, and a little bit of cleverness are more powerful than any amount of money or influence. Never, ever let them win. They were gathered in the dim light of the monitor, watching the security footage on a loop. Laya in the middle of the yard, calmly and expertly saving Lee's life. Hayes was the first to break the silence. I ran the lot numbers from her medical gear. That stuff was produced way back in 2018. The kit's more than 6 years old. Reed kept his eyes glued to the screen, a connection forming in his mind. That means she's been carrying her own private trauma kit for all this time, he muttered, almost to himself. And her bedside manner, the way she kept Lee from spiraling into panic, that's pure psychological first aid, PFA. They drill that into guys who have to operate in the absolute worst combat zones imaginable. Hayes nodded, his eyes wide with realization. Exactly. Like special operators, combat medics, people who witness things so awful they need a script just to keep a patient from dying of sheer terror. Reed leaned closer to the screen, rubbing his temples. That's not even the half of it. I found something else. Something they tried to bury so deep in the classified servers it almost ceased to exist. Imagine being one of the deadliest soldiers on the planet, a living ghost, only to have your identity erased and be forced to live as a total nobody. Every single day, you go to an office, sit at a desk, and let people treat you like you're invisible, like you're worthless. That's been Laya's life. But what happens when a ghost finally decides she's had enough of hiding? Stick around to find out, and if you love a good underdog story, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button. You see, 2 men were starting to connect the dots. You ever hear of a unit, Reed asked in a low voice, called the Ghost Hawk Intelligence Cell? A black ops team running off-the-books missions in Syria and Iraq from 2017 to 2019. They did recon, intelligence gathering. And when a problem needed to disappear, they took care of it. What happened to them? Hayes asked, his voice a ghost of a whisper. Reed's expression turned stone cold. The entire unit was wiped out in 2019. The official story is most of the team was killed in action. The few that might have made it out, their files were scrubbed, wiped from existence. And Laya? Reed nodded, slow and heavy. She was listed as KIA. But the report is a joke. They never found a body, never got a positive ID. They just presumed she was gone after an extraction went sideways. Hayes leaned in, completely captivated. You think she was a ghost hawk? I think someone went to a whole lot of trouble to make the world think she was dead and gone, Reed said. And now she just happens to show up here, playing the part of some timid analyst, letting everyone walk all over her and think she's harmless. You don't just vanish from every government database in the world unless you're either running from something truly awful or you're hunting something much, much worse. Captain Laya's official file makes her look like a paper pusher, but everything she does screams that she's something else entirely. So what is she really doing here? Let me know your theories in the comments, and if you're as hooked as I am, share this with a friend so we can crack this case together. Her biggest test came just 2 days later. An encrypted message shot over from a base in Poland. It held the targeting data for a huge drone exercise. It should have been an easy job, but the base's only cryptographer was down for the count with a brutal case of food poisoning. That code had to be broken in the next 20 minutes or the whole mission was scrubbed. Have you ever had a boss who was secretly hoping you'd fail and had no problem setting you up to do it in front of everyone? That was the exact trap being set for Captain Laya. If she couldn't decrypt those coordinates, the multi-million-dollar exercise would go down in flames, a massive embarrassment for the entire command. Colonel Hale, seeing a golden opportunity to humiliate her, called Laya into the operations center, which was jam-packed with people. "Captain," he said, his voice dripping with fake concern, "Specialist Vega is out sick. His replacement won't be on site for another 45 minutes, but we've only got 20. As our top intelligence officer, I'm sure you can handle this?" Every single person in the room turned to stare at her, basically waiting for her to crash and burn. Do you think she can pull it off? We're about to find out. With a smug little smirk, Hale strolled out of the room. The huge clock on the wall suddenly seemed to be ticking 10 times louder. Another officer, Foster, sauntered over, crossing his arms. "Look, Captain, no shame in admitting you're in over your head. Just give the word and we'll pull the plug." Laya acted like he wasn't even there. She slipped into the empty chair and focused on the screen, a total mess of jumbled code. 10 seconds ticked by, then 20. Someone in the back muttered, "She has no idea what she's doing." But then her hands moved, not to the keyboard, but to a pen and a blank sheet of paper. "Sometimes you gotta go old school," she whispered to herself. "It's a Caesar cipher, but a modified one with a rotating key, probably based on the message timestamp." Foster just scowled, completely lost. Laya paid him no mind, her pen flying across the page as she jotted down columns of letters and numbers, checking them against the message's digital signature. Her hands moved with a speed and confidence that shocked the entire room into dead silence. A puzzle that should have taken a whole team of experts hours to figure out, she was taking apart in minutes. The clock ticked past the 5-minute mark, then 8, and the only sound in the room was the sharp scratching of her pen on paper. And then she stopped. She turned to the keyboard and typed a long, perfect string of characters, hitting the enter key with a final, decisive tap. The gibberish on the screen instantly rearranged itself into a crystal clear message, coordinates, flight paths, all of it. A technician standing nearby just gawked, his mouth hanging open. "How in the world did you?" Laya just pushed her chair back and stood up. "The message is decrypted. Get it to the mission coordinator." She slid her notes across the desk to a stunned Foster and walked out of the room like she had just solved the Sunday crossword. Total time from the moment she sat down: 11 minutes and 42 seconds. Foster stared down at the piece of paper, a chaotic but brilliant whirlwind of calculations that looked like a lifetime of expertise. He flipped it over. And there, scribbled in a corner so small he almost missed it, were 2 letters and a number: NH7. What on earth did that mean? He quickly snapped a picture with his phone and sent it to his buddy in Intel, Hayes. "Found this on the analyst's scratch pad. Does NH7 ring any bells?" The moment Hayes saw that picture, his blood ran cold. He didn't even hesitate. He immediately forwarded it to Commander Reed. "Sir, you need to see this." Immediately, Reed opened the image on his screen, zooming in on the tiny letters. NH7. Nightingale 7. A shiver went down his spine. He instantly dived into the classified archives and typed it in. And there it was. Nightingale 7. The official call sign for an operative in the Ghost Hawk unit, a master cryptographer. Status: killed in action, 2019. Reed's hand was actually shaking as he tried to click on the full file, but a giant red banner flashed across his screen. Access denied. He didn't have the clearance. Not even in the same ballpark. He fired off a top priority request straight up the chain of command to a contact he had in the SEALs. Less than 10 minutes later, his secure phone buzzed. Commander Reed, this is Captain Ashford at Joint Special Operations Command. You just tried to access a file that's been on ice for 5 years. You now have my undivided attention. Reed chose his words like he was defusing a bomb. Sir, I have reason to believe an operator listed as KIA may, in fact, be alive and is currently operating under a new identity. The silence on the other end was heavy enough to feel. Do not move from your current location. Do not speak to anyone else about this. I have a team en route to you now. Reed hung up and looked over at Hayes, whose face was pale with dread. We just stepped on a landmine. The very next morning, Laia was told she had a final evaluation, a live fire extraction drill. She and a small team of 4 trainees were tasked with rescuing a high-value target from inside a hostile building. The enemy force would be actors armed with simunition rounds, basically high-powered paintballs that sting like hell but are non-lethal. It was designed to be the most realistic, high-stakes training scenario they could create. The team assembled at 0600 hours. Leia met up with the team leader, a guy named Briggs, and 3 others, Chen, Novak, and Torres. Briggs ran the briefing. All right, listen up. This is a simple in and out. We breach, clear 3 rooms, grab the asset, and we are gone. They're telling us to expect light resistance, so we should be back in time for breakfast. They got their gear on, slapping magazines full of the paint-marking rounds into their rifles. The target was an old, crumbling, 2-story warehouse with a dozen ways in. Their objective, a man in a bright orange vest, was hiding somewhere inside. They stacked up on the main door as Briggs started the countdown. 3, 2, 1, breach. The door exploded inward and the team flooded in. But right away, something felt wrong. The layout wasn't right. It was nothing like the blueprints they'd studied for hours. A long, dark hall stretched out before them, where a solid wall was supposed to be. Briggs swore under his breath. Intel was garbage. Stay sharp, people. Adapt. They pushed forward cautiously. The first room was clear. In the second, they found 2 hostiles, and Chen and Torres took them down with a couple of quick paint splats. Then, all at once, more figures began to emerge from the darkness. A lot more. This wasn't light resistance, this was a full-on ambush. First, there were 6, then 8, then at least 10 combatants, unleashing a hailstorm of paint. They were completely, hopelessly outnumbered. Fall back. To the door. Briggs screamed, but it was already too late. A line of paint rounds zipped across Torres's chest, and he dropped. Novak caught 3 rounds in the back and went down without making a sound. Chen's voice cracked with panic over the comms. I'm out! No more ammo! A paintball slammed into Briggs's shoulder, making his entire arm go numb as his rifle clattered to the floor. Just like that, it was only him and Laia left, completely trapped in the open and surrounded. Laia processed the scene in a fraction of a second. They had been deliberately herded into a kill zone with 0 cover and no way out. This wasn't a training exercise anymore. This was a setup. She hit her radio switch. Command, this is Bravo team. We are taking heavy fire and need immediate extraction. The radio hissed back with nothing but static. They were being jammed. Of course they were. Briggs looked at her, his uniform splashed with bright paint that looked eerily like blood. Captain, it's over. We have to surrender. Laia just stared at the enemy closing in, her team broken and defeated all around her. And in that moment, she made a decision. While her team was being overwhelmed, she reached into her vest and pulled out a tiny, secret radio, the kind of military-grade encrypted device that had no place in a simple training scenario. She keyed the microphone, and when she spoke, her voice had completely changed. The hesitant, quiet staff officer was gone. In her place was someone whose voice was cold, level, and all business. Nightingale 7 to Overwatch. I'm requesting an immediate extraction. Coordinates are November Whiskey 4721. We have 5 personnel, 1 high-value target. Authenticate with Tango Hotel November. For a long, tense moment, there was nothing but static. Then, a calm man's voice came back. Nightingale 7. Your authentication is confirmed. A quick reaction force is on its way. Estimated time of arrival is 2 minutes. The radio clicked off. Briggs could only gape at her, his brain refusing to process what was happening. What in the world was that? Laia didn't even bother to answer him. She just moved to find cover and drew her sidearm. Even though it was only a paintball pistol, the woman holding it was a totally different person. Her posture had changed. Her shoulders were square, her chin was up. This wasn't some desk jockey anymore. This was a professional soldier. The role players who had been advancing on them actually hesitated, confused by her sudden air of absolute authority. And then the main entrance didn't just open, it was blown clean off its hinges. This wasn't a training explosion. This was real. 4 soldiers in full tactical gear, with no unit patches or identification, stormed into the building. They moved with the chilling efficiency of true professionals. The role players froze in place. One of them finally stuttered, "Whoa, this is just a training drill." The lead operator didn't even slow down. "This drill has been terminated. Vacate this area immediately." They didn't have to be told a second time. They just disappeared. In a matter of seconds, the operators had their targets secured and were on their way out. One of the operators gave Leia a quick, respectful nod, and then they vanished. The whole rescue took less than 90 seconds. Briggs was left standing in the now silent warehouse, his mouth hanging wide open. Who were those guys? Chen asked in a whisper, his eyes huge. Did we just get saved by actual special forces? Laia calmly flicked the safety on her pistol, holstered it, and turned to her shocked team. For the first time, she looked them all in the eye with a gaze that was perfectly calm and steady. "We need to have a debriefing." Her voice was different. It was the voice of a real commander, the kind of voice you listen to without question. Briggs just blinked. "Captain!" Laia walked straight past him toward the exit. "Let's move." And they did. They followed her. Miles away in the main command center, everything was descending into chaos. Commander Reed was staring at the live footage on a massive screen, the color gone from his face. Hayes was standing right beside him. On the screen, they watched the moment Laia used her hidden radio. Nightingale 7 to Overwatch. Reed's voice was a strangled whisper. That call sign was officially retired back in 2019. Hayes jabbed a finger at the mysterious soldiers on the monitor. "And that team, I recognize that equipment. That's a JSOC quick reaction force. You don't get a team like that for a training exercise." Reed rewound the video, his eyes fixed on Leia's face. He saw her transform from a nervous officer into a stone-cold professional in less than a second. "She's not a liaison officer," he breathed out, Hayes snorted. "You think?" Reed turned to him, the massive implications of what was happening finally sinking in. "If she's a ghost hawk, and she's operating here under a fake identity, it means she's actively hunting someone. This isn't a drill. It's a live mission." "Hunting someone," Hayes repeated, his eyes moving to another camera feed, this one showing Colonel Hale's office. The colonel was on the phone, pacing back and forth like a tiger in a cage, his face a storm of pure rage. Reed's jaw clenched. "Oh, you have got to be kidding me." Hayes saw it at the same time. "You don't think Hale is the target, do you?" Reed spoke slowly, putting the pieces together. "I think we need to find out what exactly happened back in 2019, and why the Ghost Hawk program was supposedly shut down for good." On the monitor, Laia stepped out of the warehouse. She looked directly up at a security camera, almost as if she knew they were watching her every single move. And then, she smiled. It was not a nice smile. It was the smile of a hunter who knows its prey is finally caught in the trap. The screen went black. The entire command center was immediately put on full lockdown. Reed instantly made 3 desperate phone calls, the first to JSOC, the second to NATO security, and the third to his own commanding officer at SEAL Command. He delivered the same urgent message to all 3. We have a code red situation. There is a Ghost Hawk operative active on this military base. I need immediate containment protocols and an emergency security briefing. Hayes cleared everyone out of the command center until it was just him and Reed. Not even 15 minutes later, they were joined by 2 other people, General Patricia Calloway from JSOC and Colonel Hale himself, who had been ordered there without any explanation. He stormed into the room, fuming with anger and confusion. "Commander Reed, can someone please explain to me why I was just pulled from a mission-critical planning session?" General Calloway, a woman in her 50s with hair the color of steel and a matching gaze, simply stood near the monitors with her arms crossed, not saying a word. They called her the laughingstock of the base, a captain so incompetent she couldn't run a basic training drill. For weeks, they had made her life miserable, and leading the charge was Colonel Hale, a famous war hero with 3 combat tours and 2 Purple Hearts to his name. But what this highly decorated hero didn't know was that the useless captain he loved to humiliate was about to bring his entire world crashing down around him. And you're gonna want to stick around because this story of revenge is one you have to hear to believe. Inside a secure briefing room, General Calloway pointed to a frozen image of that very same captain. "Colonel Hale, tell me what you know about the Ghost Hawk intelligence cell." A flicker of something crossed Hale's face. "I'm vaguely familiar. That was an old program back in Syria. The entire thing was shut down." Calloway's eyes narrowed. "No, it was aborted. There is a very big difference." She pointed at the screen again. "What's your assessment of her?" "Captain Anders." Hale barely even looked at the picture. "She's a liaison officer. Her performance has been barely adequate, and today's failed exercise showed some extremely poor judgment. She used communication channels that were not authorized." From the other side of the room, Commander Reed spoke up. "Those channels weren't unauthorized, sir. They were highly classified," Reed explained, "reserved specifically for JSOC's quick reaction force, the kind of channels that only the most clandestine, deep-cover operators are ever given access to." Hale just looked at him, completely stunned. That is absolutely impossible. Her security clearance isn't even in the same universe as. Before he could even finish, Sergeant Major Hayes played an audio clip. The captain's voice, level and professional, echoed through the silent room. "Nightingale 7 to Overwatch. Request immediate extract." The command center was dead quiet. Calloway spoke softly, but her words hit like cannonballs. Nightingale 7 was the call sign of a Ghost Hawk operative back in 2018. A specialist in signals intelligence. An operative who was officially listed as killed in action after a mission was aborted in April of 2019. She turned her cold stare directly on Hale. "A mission abort that you personally ordered, Colonel." All the color vanished from Hale's face. That operation was a catastrophic failure," he managed to say, his voice strained. "The intel was compromised. The enemy knew we were coming. I made a command decision to extract my team. It was by the book, standard procedure." Calloway's voice became dangerously sharp. "3 of your operators died during that extraction, Colonel. They died because their air cover was inexplicably pulled. They died because their exfil route was suddenly altered. They died because someone high up decided that their mission and their lives were disposable." Hale's hands balled into white-knuckled fists at his sides. "Is that an accusation, General?" Calloway's expression was unreadable. "I'm asking you to explain why Captain Laya Anders, a woman who has been listed as killed in action for the last 5 years, is currently stationed on your base. And I'm also asking why she appears to be intensely interested in every single command decision you make." Model. With the encryption level screaming off the charts, Reed pulled a new file onto the main screen. "About an hour ago, I got into the Ghost Hawk mission archives. It needed a top-tier JSOC override. Way back in 2019, someone scrubbed a mission just 48 hours before the team was set to snatch a high-value arms dealer named Konstantin Volkov. That kill order, Colonel, was signed by you." The official story was an intel leak, but there's not a single piece of paper to back that up. No source, no report, absolutely nothing to prove the mission was ever blown. Hale's jaw was so tight it looked like it might splinter. My sources were classified. I didn't have to name them. Hayes jumped in, slapping a printout on the table. Your sources were paid. I was looking at your financials, not your personal bank accounts, of course. That would require a warrant. But I did manage to find a little shell corporation, Hayes continued. One that, what a coincidence, is registered to your wife's maiden name. On April 10th, 2019, just 2 days before you torpedoed that mission, a wire transfer for $200,000 appeared in that account. The sender? A holding company that traces right back to Volkov's financial network. The oxygen vanished from the room. Hale's face flashed from corpse white to a blotchy, furious red. That is absolutely insane! You have no proof that money was connected to Reed's calm voice cut through his sputtering. The transfer code on that deposit is an exact match for payments sent to 3 other officers, all of whom were later convicted on corruption charges. Same network, same payment method, same buyer. Calloway took one deliberate step forward. Colonel Hale, you are relieved of your command, effective immediately, pending a full criminal investigation. The military police are waiting outside. You will surrender your credentials and accompany them to the detention facility. Hale's eyes darted around the room like a cornered rat. This is a frame job. You're spinning this entire fantasy from thin air and the word of some ghost. It's more than her word, Reed said. He held up his phone and played one final audio file. This time, it was Hale's voice, perfectly clear. Captain Anders needs to be dealt with. I don't care how you do it. Reassign her, fail her evaluations, make her life a living hell until she quits. Just get her off my base. The man on the other end, Major Cross, sounded baffled. Sir, with all due respect, what's the emergency? She hasn't done anything. And then Hale's voice returned, soaked in paranoia. Because if she stays, people will start asking questions I can't afford to answer right now. The recording clicked off, and in the crushing silence, the entire career of a decorated traitor collapsed. Calloway simply arched an eyebrow. You had that little conversation 4 days ago, just after Captain Anders set foot on this base. Hale stood there, trembling, all his words gone. Reed pressed his advantage. Captain Anders has been recording everything since the moment she arrived. Every word you said, every order you gave, every pathetic attempt you made to ruin her career. She came here because she knew her team was sold out all those years ago. She just didn't know by who. So she laid a trap. She let you walk all over her, played the part of the weak, incompetent officer, and just waited for the guilty party to get scared enough to make a mistake. Hale finally found his voice, a strangled gasp. If she's Ghost Hawk, she's a massive security breach. She's the one who should be in cuffs, not she's a federal investigator, Calloway said, her voice like steel, operating under the full authority of JSOC to conduct this inquiry. You, however, Calloway finished, are under arrest. As if summoned, the door swung open to reveal 2 MPs. Hale stared at them, at the gleaming handcuffs they held, and at the smoldering ruins of his life's work. This is all just a terrible misunderstanding, he whispered. No, Calloway shot back. The mistake was selling out your soldiers for a pile of cash. This is just the bill coming due. As they Hayes finally let out a long breath. Well, that got intense. Reed's gaze was still locked on the monitor, on the ghost of Leia's face in a file photo. We have to find her. Calloway nodded. I agree. Commander, I understand you have some history with Nightingale 7. Would you care to share? Reed took a moment, then he told them everything. Syria, the convoy, the blinding explosion, the small hands that had pulled him from the twisted burning metal, and the steady voice that had counted his breaths, keeping him tethered to the world. Calloway heard his story without a single interruption. When he finished, she said plainly, So she saved your life all those years ago, and you had no idea who she was. Not until today, Reed confessed. But I never forgot her voice. The way she was so calm, like dragging me out of a fire, was just a normal day at the office. Hayes brought a new file up on the main screen. I pulled a string with a buddy at the JSOC archives and asked about the Ghost Hawk insignia. Turns out, Operatives who completed 3 successful tours earned the unit tattoo a hawk with its wings spread. But hidden details in the design told you where they served and what their specialty was. He then zoomed in on a blurry, old photograph. The image showed the back of an operator in full combat gear, and there, on the back of their neck, was the exact tattoo Laya had. A hawk looking left means the Syrian theater of operations, Hayes pointed out. The folded wingtips mean the operative has a redacted file, a secret file. And the writing underneath the hawk is an operation code, 07 Sigma. That was the official designation for the mission to take down Volkov. Calloway stared, dumbfounded. So, everyone on this base has been staring at that tattoo since she got here, and nobody knew what they were seeing. That's because Ghost Hawk was so secret, Reed said, that even their own insignia was classified. Unless you knew exactly what to look for, you just think it was a cool tattoo. And she's been wearing the truth on her skin the entire time, Hayes murmured, hiding in plain sight. Calloway finally looked away from the monitor. Where is she now? Reed quickly tapped into the security feed. She's in her room at the barracks, Reed said. Go get her. Bring her to my office. It's time we all had a real conversation. Reed and Hayes found Laya in her small room. She was perched on the edge of her cot, still dressed in the tactical gear from her last training exercise. She didn't seem surprised to see them at all. Commander, Sergeant Major, she greeted them, her voice perfectly level. Reed stepped inside as Hayes shut the door. Captain Anders, Reed began, or is it Nightingale 7? Laya met his gaze without flinching. Laya is just fine. Reed grabbed a small stool and sat down. Syria, 2018. The ambush on our convoy outside Aleppo. You were there. Laya gave a slow, deliberate nod. I was the analyst your team was tasked to protect. You pulled me out of the wreckage, Reed said, his voice thick with a storm of old emotions. My vehicle was engulfed in flames, he went on, the memory rushing back hot and fast. I was pinned inside. You pulled me free. You stopped the bleeding until the medevac could land. You were 19, Laya said softly. Too young to die because some traitor sold your route to the highest bidder. Reed stared at her, blindsided. What? That ambush wasn't bad luck, Laya said. Someone on the inside leaked our itinerary. We lost 2 good Marines that day. You were almost the 3rd. Ghost Hawk started investigating and heard rumors of a mole, but we could never pin down who it was. Hayes, who had been leaning against the wall in silence, finally spoke up. So Jay Sock sent you back in, deep undercover, to smoke out the rat. Laya rose and moved to the window. Not on the books. Officially, I died in 2019, right after Colonel Hale scuttled the Volkov operation. You see, they never found my body, she explained, her voice unwavering. So it was easy to just close my file. But JSOC always figured Hale was the leak. They just had no hard proof. So they built me a new identity, a new life as a paper-pushing liaison officer with a squeaky clean, boring record and 0 field experience. They turned me into someone he would write off as a complete nobody. Reed just shook his head, the pieces clicking into place with dizzying speed. So you just let him tear you down? You let everyone on this base treat you like you were worthless for weeks? It was the only way to get the evidence, Laya said, turning to face them. I needed him to feel untouchable, to be so sure I was a nobody that he'd get careless. Every insult he threw at me, every training drill he sabotaged, every single public humiliation, it was all recorded. It built a clear pattern of harassment, proving he was obsessed with me and me alone. And the only reason for that is because he was terrified I knew exactly who he was. Hayes' eyes widened. But if he thought you were Ghost Hawk, why would he make it so obvious he was targeting you? Wouldn't that just draw suspicion to himself? Deep down, he's not smart, Laya said, a cold little smile playing on her lips. He's a coward. The second I showed up on this base, all he could think about was getting rid of me before anyone connected me to our past. His plan was to break my spirit, make me wash out of the program so fast that no one would ever dig any deeper. Reed jumped to his feet. You used yourself as bait. I used myself as a litmus test, Laya corrected him softly. A test to see if Colonel Hale would fold under pressure. And he did. in the most spectacular way possible. She pulled a tiny digital recorder from her pocket. Every conversation, every illegal order he gave to mess with my equipment, every single attempt to isolate and humiliate me, it's all on here. This is ironclad proof of abuse of power. And when you put this recording next to his bank records, it tells you exactly why he was so desperate. He knew his past was coming back to haunt him. He just didn't realize it was me until this morning. Hayes let out a long, slow whistle. You played him like a fiddle. Laya's face hardened. He took a bribe to scrub a mission, and it cost me 3 teammates. This was never a game. This is justice. Reed had to ask the question that was eating at him. But why drag it out for so long? That stunt with the shirt? That was pure degradation. You could have brought him down weeks ago. Laya's eyes locked onto his, burning with intensity. Because just revealing who I am only proves that I survived. It does nothing to prove he's a traitor. I needed Hale to show his own cards. I needed him to prove to everyone that he was so desperate he'd try to destroy a fellow officer he supposedly had no history with. That kind of desperation is what gets you a conviction. And right on cue, the door swung open. It was Calloway. Captain Anders, we need you in the briefing room, now. As they crossed the base, soldiers literally stopped and stared. The news was spreading that something major was going down. Hale's arrest, the military police showing up, the rumor mill was in overdrive, the briefing room was already full. A panel of officers was assembled. Calloway, 2 investigators from the Judge Advocate General's office, a legal officer, and, sitting awkwardly off to the side, were Corporal Briggs and Lieutenant Foster. Leia stopped and looked right at them. Briggs shot out of his chair. Captain Anders, I have to apologize for my actions, for how I treated you. Foster gave a sharp nod. We both do. The story going around was that you were just some officer who couldn't cut it. It never even crossed our minds to question the narrative. Laya watched them both, her expression calm and impossible to read. You were following the orders of a man you were supposed to trust. That's no excuse, Briggs insisted, his voice stronger now. I'm the one who ripped your shirt. I publicly shamed you, and I am so sorry. For what it's worth, I'm ready to testify to every single order Colonel Hale gave me. Foster then spoke up. I also pulled his encrypted emails off the base server. I found messages between him and Cross, detailing every single way they were planning to make you fail. It's all right there, in black and white. Laya gave a slow, deliberate nod. Thank you. Calloway gestured to the table. Captain Anders, please have a seat. We need to take your official statement. Laya sat down, and the recorder started. For the next 20 minutes, she laid out the entire story. She told them everything. Her true identity as Ghost Hawk, the mission that was sabotaged, the death of her team, her covert investigation, her arrival at the base, every act of humiliation and sabotage she endured, the clear pattern of Hale's predatory behavior, and all the proof she had painstakingly gathered. When she finished, the room was heavy with silence. Calloway spoke first. Captain, I have to ask. You endured weeks of this treatment. You let everyone believe you were incompetent and weak. Why not just have Hale arrested from the get-go? Laya looked down at her hands, which were folded calmly on the table. Because arresting one man doesn't fix a broken system. It just removes one bad cog. I needed to prove that the system itself allowed this to happen, that it was possible for a commanding officer to target a subordinate, ruin their career, and obliterate their reputation, and nobody would even bat an eye. Every person on this base saw what was happening to me. They all watched, and almost all of them stayed silent. She went on, her gaze sweeping across the room. That's the real problem, not just Colonel Hale. He's a symptom. The disease is the culture that gave him the power to act without any fear of consequence. The legal officer leaned forward. So this whole thing wasn't just a sting operation to catch Hale. It was a demonstration of the system's failure to protect its own. And to create a permanent record of that failure, Laya confirmed, so that the next person who tries to report abuse has proof that the system has failed before and that it can be forced to change. Real accountability isn't just about punishment, it's about creating change that lasts. Calloway nodded slowly, a look of profound understanding on her face. I see. Your methods were highly unorthodox, Captain, but your results are indisputable. She turned to the investigators. What are your recommendations? One of them began to read from a file. We recommend a full audit of Colonel Hale's command decisions, going back a minimum of 5 years. We also recommend a complete review of every personnel file he ever had influence over. Additionally, we're setting up a new anonymous reporting system so soldiers can report misconduct without fear of reprisal. And mandatory training on command climate and harassment prevention will be implemented for all personnel, effective immediately. The second investigator added, furthermore, we are moving to give the Ghost Hawk program formal recognition. That unit has operated in the shadows for far too long. It's time those soldiers get the official credit they've earned. Calloway agreed. Get it done. Captain Anders, you are officially cleared of all wrongdoing. Your rank and status are fully restored. Your service as Ghost Hawk will be added to your official record, with all the commendations that go with it. Laya just nodded. Thank you, ma'am. Calloway then rose from her chair. There's one more thing. The Joint Chiefs would like to offer you an instructor position at the Survival, Evasion, Resistance, and Escape School, teaching survival tactics to the next generation of special operators. You've proven you can endure the absolute worst this world has to offer. We need soldiers like you, training our best. Laya thought about the offer for a long moment. I appreciate that, ma'am, but I'm not finished here yet. Calloway raised an eyebrow. Finished with what? Laya didn't reply. The meeting was over. As everyone else began to leave, Reed hung back. Can I ask you something? He asked. She looked at him. It's about Syria, he said, his voice dropping to a near whisper. When you saved me, you could have just left me, taken the intel, and extracted. That would have been the smart play. You were 19 years old, Laya said, her voice gentle, and you were still breathing. That made the decision pretty simple. Reed felt his throat tighten. I never got the chance to thank you for that. You just did, Laya replied as she stood to leave. It's been a long day, Commander. Get some rest. She walked to the door, then paused. And Reed, you turned out all right. I'm glad I got to see it. And then she was gone. Reed sat alone in the quiet room, realizing his hands were shaking. It wasn't fear. It was a tidal wave of relief, grief, and overwhelming gratitude all hitting him at once. Justice can take years. It takes an incredible amount of patience, and sometimes it takes someone willing to walk through hell just to drag the truth into the light. Do you think you would have had that kind of strength? If this story moved you, hit that thanks button and make sure you subscribe, because Phase 2 is about to kick off, and it's going to be even more intense. That evening, a heavy silence fell over the base. Hale was locked up tight in the brig. His office was sealed, his files confiscated. The story had torn through the base like a flash flood. Soldiers who had been mocking Laya just days before now couldn't meet her gaze. Some looked ashamed, others just confused. A few looked angry not at her, but at themselves for being so blind, for not questioning what was happening right in front of them, for just going along with the herd. Over in the mess hall, Hayes was nursing a cup of coffee when Sergeant Carter sat down opposite him. I heard about Captain Anders, about who she really is. Hayes just nodded slightly. You heard right. Carter just shook his head, still trying to process it. I saw her on the rifle range. I knew a shot like that wasn't just luck, but I told myself it was a fluke, a 1 in a million chance, anything but the obvious truth staring me in the face. We all see what we expect to see, Hayes said quietly. She was counting on that. Carter was silent for another minute. So, you think she'll stick around? Another soldier asked Hayes later. I doubt it, Hayes said. People like her are always hunting for the next mission. He couldn't stop thinking about the perfect brass triangles she left at the firing range, her unshakable control. In his 32 years of service, he had never seen anyone weaponize humility the way she did, turning perceived weakness into a shield and patience into a razor. It was both incredible and terrifying. That night, back in her room, Laya sat on her bunk, flipping a challenge coin. The worn metal gleamed. A hawk was carved on one side. On the other, the serial number GH07114. It was her only proof of who she really was. She set it on the nightstand, a silent testament to a ghost who was very much alive, and opened her laptop, ready for whatever came next. The only light in the suffocating darkness of the tiny room came from her laptop screen. One new message from a ghost sender waited in her inbox, the subject line ominously empty. She opened it. The words were, "Clinical, direct, Tower 4 is active. New target designated, Ramstein Air Base, Germany. You have 72 hours to be on site. Operation Nightfall Phase 2 authentication is Tango Hotel, November." 3 files were attached. The first was a satellite image of Ramstein covered in annotations, building schematics, flight paths, and guard patrol routes. The second contained dossiers on 3 individuals, 2 men, 1 woman. Their names were redacted, but their job titles told the whole story: logistics, contracting, and finance. The final attachment contained a single, brutal order in bold red type: dismantle the network, seize the assets, settle the score. Laya's expression remained perfectly neutral as she read. This was it, Phase 2. General Hale was just a single, rotten branch on a deeply corrupted tree. The web of insiders who propped him up, who got rich from the chaos of war while treating soldiers' lives like poker chips, was still going strong. The agency didn't just want to trim, they wanted the entire organization pulled up by the roots. And they just handed her the spade. She slammed the laptop shut, her head resting against the cold metal wall of her bunk with a soft thud. Every single fiber of her being ached. For weeks, she had taken the punches, swallowed the insults, and played the part of a washed-up, useless soldier. It was more than just physically exhausting. It was the kind of thing that corrodes your spirit. There's a tax you pay for letting people walk all over you, for watching them smirk while you bleed. But it had all been worth it. Hale was out of the picture. The first tremors were already rattling the foundations of their dirty little empire. And now, she had the green light to go after the rest of them. She pushed herself to her feet and moved to the small window. The base was blanketed in night, with only a few sparse lights marking the patrol paths of the sentries. Everything looked peaceful, ordinary. That's when she saw him. A lone silhouette stood by the perimeter fence. He was too far away to make out any details, but his gaze was fixed squarely on her window. She didn't move a muscle, just watched. The figure raised a pair of binoculars. After about 10 seconds, he lowered them and lifted a radio to his mouth. Laya couldn't hear the words, but she knew the message, as if she'd heard it herself. The hawk is in the nest. Phase 2 is a go. Then the figure turned and vanished back into the night. Laya stayed at the window long after he'd gone. She didn't feel a sense of victory. All she felt was tired, a deep, bone-deep exhaustion from a hunt that just wouldn't end. She was tired of living in the shadows, tired of wearing masks and pretending to be someone she wasn't. But her feelings were irrelevant. The mission was all that mattered. The 3 operators who died back in 2019, they mattered. The countless good soldiers betrayed by men like Hale, they were the ones who mattered. Real justice isn't a flashy, dramatic event. It's quiet, it's methodical, and it is absolutely relentless. And when it came to that, nobody was better. Turning from the window, she pulled her go bag from under her bunk and started packing. Clothes, a trauma kit, her challenge coin, a sidearm, everything she'd need for a business trip to Ramstein. A sharp knock on the door made her freeze, her hand instinctively going to her weapon. It's Reed. She exhaled slowly before unlocking the door. Reed was slumped against the opposite wall, looking like he'd just gone a few rounds in a fight himself. "Couldn't shut my brain off," he said, his voice raw with exhaustion. "Figured you might be in the same boat." Laya stepped back, and he shuffled inside. He dropped into the room's only chair as she sat on the edge of her cot. The silence between them felt heavy, with things left unsaid, until he finally broke it. "You're leaving." It wasn't a question. "Tomorrow," she confirmed softly. "Well before sunrise." "Ramstein," he stated, the name just hanging there in the still air. Laya's poker face didn't even twitch. "How did you puzzle that out?" Because I know how you operate, Reed replied, his eyes locked on hers. You don't just kill the snake at your feet and call the job done. You follow its trail all the way back to the den. Hale was just the fangs. You're going after the venom itself, and you won't stop until you find out who let it loose in the first place, Reed added. That's the idea. He leaned forward, his tone full of sincerity. Take me with you. Laya simply shook her head. This isn't your mission, Reed. You saved my life, he countered instantly. That makes it my mission. You don't owe me anything, she said, her voice gentle but firm. You pulled through, and you became a damn fine officer. That's all the repayment I could ever ask for. Reed was silent for a beat. When I was 19, bleeding out in that Humvee, he started, his voice barely a whisper. I thought it was over, the end, and I was at peace with it. I knew the risks, but then you were there, dragging me from the wreckage, and you said something to me that I've never forgotten. What was that? Laya asked, her voice soft. Reed met her gaze. You said, not today, not on my watch. And for some reason, I believed you. And you were right. Laya glanced away for a moment. I was just doing my job. No, Reed insisted, his voice gaining strength. That was just you. The world needs people like that. People who refuse to quit. People who never, ever leave a soldier behind, he said, rising to his feet. Someone who will fight for what's right, no matter the personal cost. He moved a step closer. Listen, if you're going after these monsters, you shouldn't have to do it alone. We have resources, support. You don't have to carry this weight by yourself. A faint, weary smile touched Laya's lips. I appreciate the offer, Commander. I truly do. But some hunts are more effective with a lone wolf. You bring in a pack, and the prey just disappears into the ground. Reed gave a slow nod, his face etched with understanding. All right, then just promise me one thing. When this is all over, when you've burned their entire network to ash, you'll take a real vacation. Let someone else carry the sky for a while. Laya's silence was his only answer. With a sigh, Reed walked to the door and paused. Laya, thank you. For everything. She offered a small, single nod. Get some rest, Commander, she said quietly. He slipped out of the room, and the lock clicked shut. She finished packing with a practiced, methodical calm, then lay down on her cot, still fully dressed, and stared at the ceiling. Sleep was a luxury she couldn't often afford. Her mind was a never-ending reel of the faces of those she hadn't been able to save, their final moments replaying in the dark. But then there were the others, Reed, Lee, and a handful more. The ones she times did, times save. That had to count for something. The ceiling fan spun in lazy, hypnotic circles, casting shifting shadows across the walls. She started her nightly ritual. Breathe in for 4 seconds. Hold for 4. Breathe out for 4. Over and over. Gradually, the tightness in her shoulders began to loosen. The storm inside her head began to quiet, and she finally drifted away. Her eyes snapped open at 4:30 in the morning, while the world was still cloaked in black. She was dressed in minutes, her bag thrown over one shoulder as she moved like a ghost through the silent barracks. The entire base was wrapped in a pre-dawn stillness, the silence only broken by the distant, shadowy figures of guards walking their routes. She made her way to the motor pool, found the truck she'd been assigned, and tossed her gear into the bed. The engine turned over with a deep, satisfying growl. Rolling through the main gate, she glanced in the rearview mirror one last time. The camp's lights dwindled behind her, swallowed by the immense darkness. She thought of Hale, Briggs, and Foster, every single man who had ever looked at her and seen nothing more than a small, quiet woman they could push aside. They were all about to learn a lesson the hard way. Quiet is not the same as weak, and patience can be the deadliest weapon of them all. She aimed the truck east, toward the airfield, toward Germany, and toward the next step in her grand design. From his office window, Hayes watched her taillights fade into the night. He raised his coffee mug in a silent toast. Have you ever been so completely erased that you started to doubt you were ever there at all? That's what they did to Leia. One day she was Ghost Hawk, the lead operative for an elite team called 07 Sigma. The next, she was a ghost for real, a dead woman walking. Her team was ambushed, sold out by the very command they'd sworn to protect, and the official story was that they died because of their own screw-ups. But the traitors made one huge mistake. They didn't check to make sure she was actually gone. And if you want to see how one forgotten soldier can make a whole corrupt system come crashing down, you're gonna want to stick around. Laya's new life was a million miles from the one she'd been forced to leave. She lived in a tiny apartment that always smelled like damp cement and old pizza, and she worked under the table bussing tables at a greasy spoon diner. She was a complete nobody. People looked right through her, just another part of the city's worn-out scenery. But every single night, she'd slide the deadbolt on her door, pull out a heavy steel coin, and run her thumb over the engravings. One side had a hawk in flight. The other had their team motto, silent, lethal, forgotten. It was a gift from her commander, a man who saw potential in her when she was just a scrawny recruit. "We're the ghosts in the machine, Laya," he'd told her. "We make sure the world keeps spinning, and nobody ever knows we were here." Well, now they were all ghosts, and she was the only one left to haunt the men who put them in their graves. Her first target wasn't some big shot. He was a nobody, a low-level data guy named Arthur. Laya didn't bust down his door. Instead, she accidentally stumbled and spilled a steaming hot coffee all over him right as he was walking into his office. While she was making a huge fuss, apologizing, and dabbing his jacket with napkins, she swiped his security badge, cloned it with a tiny device in her palm in less than 3 seconds, and slipped it right back into his coat pocket. He didn't have a clue. That night, she strolled into his office, not to steal files, but to look at a sticky note on his computer. It had a kid's drawing of a dog with Sparky written under it. That was her key. Just like that, the ghost was back in the machine. She didn't delete anything. She just changed a single digit in a bank routing number for a massive, illegal money transfer. It was a tiny little tweak that was about to set off a Category 5 hurricane of chaos. That one little thread led her to her next target, and a punch to the gut. The man handling the secret accounts was a face from her past, a former handler she once would have trusted with her life. She set up a meet, pretending to be a source with dirt to sell. They met in a bustling cafe, but as he leaned in close to talk, she saw the faint glint of a microphone wire clipped to his collar. It was a trap. In the blink of an eye, the cafe erupted. Laya flipped their table, used a heavy glass sugar dispenser like a flashbang, and disappeared out the back before anyone even knew what was happening. She left her old friend sitting there with a massive problem, explaining to his bosses how he'd let a dead woman slip right through his fingers. But the biggest secret was still buried. Following the money trail led her up the chain of command, all the way to a 4-star general the whole country saw as a hero, General Maddox. He was the one who signed off on her team's final mission. He had sold them out for a multi-billion-dollar weapons contract, then buried their names in shame to cover his tracks. His betrayal was public, and she decided her revenge had to be, too. Laya found out Maddox was getting a Lifetime Achievement Award at a massive, televised gala. While the nation got ready to celebrate a hero, she got ready to unmask a monster. On the night of the event, Laya, dressed as a caterer, slipped into the media control booth. As General Maddox strode onto the stage to a thunderous standing ovation, she hijacked the broadcast. The giant screens behind him were supposed to play a tribute video. Instead, they lit up with encrypted bank statements, secret recordings of his treason, and the original mission file he had faked, all with his digital signature glowing at the bottom. The clapping died down, replaced by a ripple of stunned silence, then gasps from the crowd. His entire life's work turned to ash, live, for the whole world to see. They didn't just escort him off the stage, military police swarmed him. Turns out, justice can be very, very loud. Weeks later, the scandal was still the #1 story on the planet, but Laya was gone. She was standing on a cliff, watching the sun rise over the ocean. In her hand was the challenge coin. She hadn't just gotten revenge, she'd cleared the names of her fallen family. The motto was still there: silent, lethal, forgotten. But thanks to her, they would never be forgotten again. Laya gently set the coin on a small pile of stones she'd made, one for each member of her team. She wasn't a ghost haunted by the past anymore. She was the woman who had dragged the truth out into the light. And the lesson here is pretty simple. You can try to bury the truth, and you can try to erase good people. But a promise between comrades, that's one thing that will never, ever die.